The enemy commander smiled as he watched the first American fall. From his position high on the ridge, he lifted his radio and gave the order every fighter below him had been waiting for. "Close the trap. Let none of them leave alive." He had planned this for weeks, drawn these Navy SEALs into the valley like sheep into a slaughter pen, and now he intended to enjoy every second of their dying. He did not know that 800 meters away, a woman was watching him through a scope, and that his smile would be the last one he ever wore. Before we go on, if you love stories of courage under fire, please take a second to subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And do me a favor, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels tonight. Now let's begin. The valley had a name, but Lieutenant Commander Ryan Carter would never say it out loud again for as long as he lived. He would carry it silently, the way a man carries a scar he doesn't show anyone. On the morning everything went wrong, the sun had not yet burned the cold out of the eastern Afghan mountains, and Carter stood in the belly of the compound they had been ordered to take, listening to the quiet and hating it. He had been a SEAL for 14 years. He had learned to trust silence about as far as he could throw it. "Talk to me, Delgado," Carter said into his radio, keeping his voice flat. "What are you seeing up top?" There was a pause that lasted 1 second too long. "Nothing, boss," came the answer. "That's the thing. There's nothing to see. No goats, no farmers, no kids. This village is empty." Carter felt something cold slide down the back of his neck. Empty villages in this part of the world were not peaceful. Empty villages were a message. Someone had told these people to leave, and someone only did that when they knew what was coming. "Everybody hold," Carter said. "Nobody moves until I say, 'Reyes, get me eyes on that eastern ridge.'" "Copy," said Petty Officer Marcus Reyes, 26 years old, the youngest man on the team, a kid from Ohio who still called Carter sir, even after Carter had told him 100 times to knock it off. Reyes moved to a broken window and lifted his rifle. "Ridge looks clean, sir. I don't see—" The first bullet took Reyes in the shoulder and spun him around like a door on a hinge. For 1 full second, nobody breathed, and then the entire world came apart. The gunfire did not build. It arrived all at once from every direction, a wall of sound so complete that Carter felt it in his chest before his brain even registered it as danger. Rounds chewed through the mud walls. Dust and stone rained down. Somewhere close, a man was screaming, and it took Carter a moment to realize the man was Reyes on the ground, clutching his shoulder, his eyes huge with the specific terror of someone being shot for the first time in his life. "Contact!" Carter roared. "Contact all sides! Get down, get to cover!" He grabbed Reyes by the vest and dragged him behind a low stone wall, and even as he did it, he was counting muzzle flashes, counting positions, counting the seconds until this became something they could not survive. The numbers were bad. The numbers were the worst he had ever seen. "Petty Officer Kane," Carter shouted over the noise. "How many give me a number?" Kane, the team's point man, pressed himself flat against the wall and risked a look. He was a big man, calm in a way that had unsettled Carter when they first met, the calm of someone who had simply decided a long time ago that fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. But when Kane pulled back, his face had changed. "I count muzzle flashes on all 4 ridges," Kane said, "north, south, east, west. We're in a bowl, boss. They put us in a bowl." "How many?" 30, maybe more. Kane wiped dust from his eyes. "They were waiting for us. This whole thing. The intel, the empty village, all of it. Somebody walked us in here." Carter didn't answer. There wasn't time to be angry yet. Anger was a thing you did later if there was a later. Right now, there was only the next decision and the one after that, and every one of them had to be correct because a wrong one meant somebody's mother got a phone call. A PKM machine gun opened up from the northern ridge, and the wall above Carter's head disintegrated. He threw himself over Reyes as chunks of stone the size of fists slammed down around them. "Medic!" Carter shouted. "I need a medic on Reyes now." Doc Ellison came crawling on his elbows and knees, dragging his aid bag, staying below the line of fire out of pure instinct. He got to Reyes and his hands were already moving, cutting away the vest, finding the wound pressing hard. "Through and through," Ellison said. "Missed the artery. He'll live if we get out of here." He looked up at Carter, and the two men understood each other without another word. If was doing a lot of work in that sentence. "Boss," Kane called from the wall. "I've got RPG on the East Ridge. He's setting up." Everybody down, Carter screamed. The rocket came in with a sound like the sky ripping open. It hit the corner of the compound where two of Carter's men had taken cover, and the explosion lifted Carter off the ground and dropped him back down hard enough to knock the wind out of him. His ears rang, his vision went white, and then came back in pieces. When he could see again, he saw that the corner of the building was gone, and so were the two men who had been standing there. He didn't have time to feel it. He filed it away with the valley's name in the place he kept things he would deal with later. "Report!" Carter shouted, his own voice sounding far away and underwater. "Everybody report, count off!" The voices came back to him one by one, and each one was a small mercy and a small terror. Kane, Ellison, Delgado, Torres, Whitfield, and then silence where two more voices should have been. "That's it," Kane said quietly. "That's everybody that's answering." 6 men. 6 men left standing, and one of them shot in a compound surrounded on all sides by an enemy that had planned this down to the minute. Carter pressed his back against the wall and forced his breathing to slow. He had been trained for this. Not for this exactly, because nobody was ever trained for the exact shape of their own worst day, but for the feeling of it, for the way the panic tried to climb up your throat and take over your hands. He swallowed it back down. "All right," Carter said, and he made his voice into the thing his men needed it to be, steady and low and certain. "All right, listen to me. We are not dying in this hole. You hear me? Not today, Kane. I need you watching that eastern ridge. That's where their heavy weapons are. Torres, Whitfield, you cover north and south. Ellison, you keep Reyes breathing. Delgado." "Yeah, boss." "Get me air. I don't care who you have to beg. Get me anything with wings and guns." Delgado, the radio man, was already crouched over his equipment. "I've been calling since the first shot, boss. Command copies. They're saying nearest air asset is 18 minutes out." 18 minutes. Carter closed his eyes for half a second. 18 minutes was a lifetime. 18 minutes in this bowl against 30 guns was not a rescue. It was a countdown. "What about the overwatch? We had a sniper element on the high ground for exactly this reason. Where the hell is our overwatch?" Delgado's face told him the answer before the words did. "I've been trying, boss. Overwatch is not responding. I've called Hawkeye 6 times. Nothing but static." Hawkeye. That was the call sign for the 2-person sniper team that had been inserted the night before, positioned on a distant ridge with a commanding view of the entire valley. An Army Ranger sniper and her spotter attached to the mission for precisely this scenario. They were supposed to be the eyes in the sky. They were supposed to see the ambush before it happened. And now they were silent, and Carter's stomach turned over as he ran through the possibilities. Overrun, killed, compromised. Every option was a bad one. "Keep trying," Carter said. "Every 30 seconds. Somebody up there might still be alive." He didn't know how right he was. 800 meters away on a rocky spine of mountain that overlooked the entire kill box, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart lay perfectly still and watched 6 good men die in slow motion, and she could not do a single thing about it. That was what protocol said. Observe, report, engage only high-value targets if directed. She had said those words back to her commanding officer 12 hours earlier in the dark as they'd gone over the mission one last time. She had believed in them. Rules existed for reasons. A sniper who broke discipline got people killed. That was the doctrine she had lived by for 8 years, through 3 deployments, through more confirmed kills than she ever talked about, even with the other snipers, even with the men who understood. But doctrine had not accounted for what she was watching through her scope right now. "Cole," she said quietly, not moving her eye from the glass. "Cole, tell me you're getting comms back." There was no answer. "Cole." She turned her head just an inch, just enough, and she saw him. Sergeant Danny Cole, her spotter, 29 years old, married 11 months. A photo of his wife tucked into his helmet band, the way he always carried it. He was lying 3 feet from her with a wound in his neck that no amount of pressure was going to fix, and his eyes were open, and he was looking at her, and he was trying to say something. Hart moved to him. She pressed her hand against the wound out of pure reflex, knowing it was already too late, knowing it and doing it anyway, because you did not stop. You did not ever stop, not while your hands could still move. "Stay with me, Danny," she said. "Stay with me, you hear? You do not get to check out. Talk to me. Come on." His lips moved. She leaned close. "Comms," Cole whispered. Round hit the radio. On the last burst, took it out. A breath wet and terrible. They don't know, down there. They don't know we're still, they think we're gone. I know, Hart said. I know. Just hold on. Air's coming. It's coming. But Cole was already looking past her, past the mountain, at something she couldn't see. His hand found her wrist and gripped it hard, one last surge of strength. Evie. He almost never called her that. Almost never. Those men down there. His eyes came back to hers, and there was something in them. Something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. You can see him, can't you? Danny. You can see every one of those enemy positions, better than anybody alive right now. His grip tightened. Don't you let him die because a rule says you gotta watch. And then his hand went slack, and his eyes stayed open, still looking at that thing past the mountain, and Danny Cole was gone. For a moment, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart did not move at all. The battle raged in the valley below her, muffled by distance, a chaos of light and sound that had already killed two of the SEALs she'd been sent to protect. Her spotter was dead beside her. Her radio was destroyed. Nobody knew she was alive. By every rule she had ever followed, her mission was over. She was a single soldier on a mountain cut off with no orders and no way to receive them. And she had never in her life been so clear about what she was going to do. She closed Danny Cole's eyes with 2 fingers. She said something to him, quiet, that no one else would ever hear. And then she crawled back to her rifle, an SR-25 semi-automatic sniper system, and she settled behind it, and she began to breathe the way they had taught her, slow and even, letting her heart rate fall, letting the whole shaking world go still and quiet inside her skull. Through the scope, she found the northern ridge. She found the PKM machine gunner, who was at that very moment hammering rounds into the compound where the SEALs were pinned. She could see him clearly, the way he leaned into the gun, the way his shoulders worked, the way his life was right now, the difference between those men living and dying. She had 200 meters of practice for every meter of that shot. She had made this shot 10,000 times on ranges in training in her sleep. Her finger settled onto the trigger. She thought about Danny, and she took the shot. Down in the valley, Kane saw the machine gunner on the northern ridge simply stop. 1 second he was pouring fire down onto them, and the next his gun went silent, and the man slumped forward over it and did not move again. Kane blinked. "Boss," he said slowly. "Boss, the north gun just went down." "Say again," Carter shouted. "The PKM on the north ridge. It just stopped. Gunner's down. I saw him drop." Kane pressed himself against the wall, scanning. "I didn't fire. Nobody fired. He just dropped." Carter didn't understand it, and he didn't have time to try. "Take the pressure off whatever it is," he shouted. "Torres, shift your fire to." He never finished the order. Because on the eastern ridge, the RPG operator, who had killed 2 of his men, the one who was even now shouldering another rocket to finish the job, snapped backward as if he'd been kicked by a horse, and the rocket he'd been about to fire tumbled harmlessly down the slope. "That's 2, Kane breathed. "Boss, that's 2. Somebody's shooting them. Somebody up high." And then Carter understood. Understanding hit him like cold water. "Hawkeye," he said. "It's Hawkeye. Our Overwatch is still alive." He grabbed the radio from Delgado. "Hawkeye, Hawkeye, this is Carter. If you can hear me, keep doing what you're doing. We see you. We see your work. Keep it up." There was no answer over the radio. There couldn't be. But another enemy position on the western ridge, a spotter who had been calling out the SEALs' movements to coordinate the fire against them, went suddenly and permanently silent. "She can't hear us," Delgado said. "Comms are one way. But boss, look what she's doing." Because it was becoming a pattern now, and the pattern was beautiful and terrible. The enemy gun on the north ridge gone. The RPG on the east gone. The spotter on the west gone. Someone up on the high ground was moving through the enemy's most important positions with a speed and precision that Carter had never witnessed in 14 years of war, taking away one shot at a time, exactly the things that were killing his men. "She's picking them apart," Kane said, and there was awe in his voice, raw and undisguised. "She's not just shooting, she's reading the whole battlefield. She's taking out their command and control. Every shot is the shot that matters most." Up on her ridge, Evelyn Hart was not thinking about awe. She was not thinking about anything except the next target and the round after that. She had a number in her head, and the number was 160. 160 rounds. That was every piece of ammunition she and Danny had carried up this mountain, and now it was all hers and against 30 or more enemy fighters. Every single one of those rounds was a decision she could not afford to get wrong. She did the math the way snipers do, cold and constant running under everything else. 160 rounds, 30-plus targets. That left margin for misses, for follow-up shots, for the ones who took cover, for the ones who moved. It was enough. It had to be enough. She would make it enough. She found a mortar crew setting up behind a low rock wall on the southern slope. 3 men working fast to drop tubes that would rain death into the compound from an angle no cover could stop. She took the first man. She rode the recoil, brought the rifle back down, and took the second before the first had finished falling. The third man froze, and freezing was the worst thing he could have done, and she took him too. 3 rounds, 3 men. She kept breathing. In the compound, Doc Ellison felt the change before he understood it. He was still bent over Reyes, still keeping the kid alive, but some animal part of his brain, the part that had kept him breathing through 4 deployments, noticed that the volume of incoming fire had dropped. Not stopped, but dropped noticeably, like a storm that had passed its worst. "Doc," Reyes said weakly from the ground. "Doc, are we going to make it?" Ellison looked down at the kid, 26 years old, scared, bleeding, trusting him. "Yeah," Ellison said, and for the first time since the shooting started, he almost believed it. "Yeah, kid, we're going to make it. We got an angel on the mountain." That was what they would call her later, some of them, the angel on the mountain. But Evelyn Hart did not feel like an angel. She felt like a woman doing arithmetic with human lives 1 round at a time, and she felt the weight of every single subtraction. The enemy commander on the ridge did not smile anymore. He had watched his carefully built trap begin to unravel in a way he could not comprehend. His machine gun on the north silent, his rockets on the east silent, his mortars silent, his spotters gone. He shouted into his own radio, demanding to know what was happening, why his men were dying, where the fire was coming from. And no one could tell him because no one could find her. The shots came from too far. The intervals were too fast. It did not seem possible that it was one shooter. He began to believe in his fear that the Americans had brought some new weapon, some machine, because no human being fired like this. He was wrong. It was a human being. It was one exhausted, grief-stricken woman who had made a decision and who was now simply refusing to stop. Kane Carter called, and there was something in his own voice now that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. "Kane, what's their strength? Now, what are we looking at?" Kane risked a longer look this time because he finally could. "Boss, their fire's cut in half. More than half. She's taken out both machine guns, at least 1 RPG team, the mortars, and I count at least 4 or 5 other positions just gone quiet." He turned back and his eyes were bright. "Boss, 10 minutes ago, we were dead men. I mean that. We were dead. And now we've got a chance," Carter finished. He keyed the radio. "Delgado, revise sitrep to command. Tell them our Overwatch element is active and effective. Tell them Hawkeye is single-handedly suppressing enemy heavy weapons. And tell them we need that air fast because whoever's up on that mountain is buying us minutes with her life, and I am not going to waste them." Up on the ridge, Evelyn Hart shifted her position just slightly to get a better angle on a group of fighters who were trying to reorganize behind a stone outbuilding. And as she moved, some cold, professional instinct made her glance just for a second at the terrain below and to her left, at the goat trails that wound up the mountainside, at the folds of rock that a smart enemy could use for cover. And she saw them. A squad, 6, maybe 7 fighters breaking off from the main body of the ambush, moving away from the compound, moving with purpose, in a direction that made no tactical sense at all unless they had figured out where she was, unless they were coming for her. Hart went very still. She understood in that instant what she had done. Every shot she'd taken had been a signal. Not one they could hear, but one they could feel in the systematic destruction of their best positions. They knew now that a shooter on the high ground was killing them, and they had done the geometry, and they had sent a hunting party to climb her mountain and end her. She was at that moment one soldier. She had a dead spotter, no radio, no support, half her ammunition already spent, and a squad of armed men beginning to climb toward her position from below. And in the valley, the SEALs still needed her. If she stopped shooting to defend herself, the enemy's heavy weapons would come back online, and Carter's team would be pinned again, and the 2 minutes she'd bought them would evaporate. If she kept shooting at the valley, the hunting party would reach her, and she would die. It was not a choice. Not to her. because there was only one answer that Danny would have understood, only one answer she could live, with only one answer that was true to the thing she had decided when she closed her spotter's eyes. "All right," Evelyn Hart said out loud to the mountain, to Danny, to no one. "All right, both then, I'll do both." And she began to fight two battles at once. Carter felt the shift almost immediately. He didn't know what it was, but he felt it. The enemy fire in the valley, which had been fading towards silence, suddenly steadied. Not increased, but it stopped falling. "Boss, something changed," Kane called. "The pressure's not dropping anymore. It leveled off." Carter frowned. "Well, I've been." What happened? He would not know the answer for hours. He would not know until the debrief, when they reconstructed the whole impossible morning minute by minute, that the reason the pressure had leveled off was that his angel on the mountain had just divided herself in two, that she was now splitting her attention and her rounds and her heartbeat between the men in the valley and the men climbing up to kill her. That every shot she sent down into the bowl to protect the seals was a shot she wasn't using to defend her own life. But some part of him sensed it. Some part of him understood that whatever was happening up on that ridge had just gotten harder and more dangerous and more desperate. "Delgado," Carter said, and his voice was tight. "How long on that air?" 11 minutes, boss." "Cut it in half, I don't care how. Our Overwatch is in trouble. I can feel it." Hart put a round through the chest of a fighter who had popped up to fire on the compound, then rolled hard to her right as the first shots from the hunting party cracked off the rocks where she'd been lying. They were close, closer than she'd expected. They'd move fast and quiet, and if she hadn't glanced left when she did, they'd already have her. She came up in a new position, breathing hard now. The calm still there but thinner, stretched over a rising current of adrenaline she had to fight to keep down. She had two problems and one rifle. She solved the immediate one first. She found the lead man of the hunting party 40 meters below her and climbing, and she took him, and he tumbled back down the slope and took a second man with him. 2 down, 5 maybe to go, and then back to the valley because the valley couldn't wait. She swung the rifle back toward the compound, found an enemy fighter who was maneuvering toward the SEAL's weak flank and dropped him. Then back to the mountain where the hunting party had gone to ground and was now firing up at her in earnest rounds, snapping past her head chips of stone stinging her cheek. Back and forth, valley and mountain, the men below and the men beside her. She was doing something that no doctrine had ever prepared a sniper to do, fighting a stationary long-range engagement and a moving close-range engagement simultaneously alone. And she was doing it because the alternative was letting people die. And she had already decided hours ago, kneeling over Danny Cole, that she was done letting people die today. "How you doing on ammo?" she muttered to herself and glanced at her load, and her stomach dropped. Below half, well below half. She'd been firing faster than she'd realized the pace of the two-front fight eating through her rounds. She did the math again, and this time the math was not friendly. This time the math said that if this kept up, she was going to run out, and she was going to run out with enemies still standing. "Then make everyone count?" she said in Danny's voice, almost in the voice he used to use when they lay out on a ridge for 18 hours waiting for a single shot. "Make everyone count, Evie." She slowed down. She refused the tempting, panicked urge to fire faster, and instead she fired smarter. She stopped taking every shot and started taking only the shots that mattered most. The fighter with the RPG, the one directing others, the one about to reach cover from which he could hurt the SEALs. She let the small threats live a few seconds longer so she could kill the large ones first, and it was the hardest kind of discipline. There was the discipline of doing less when everything in you screamed to do more. Down in the valley, Ellison had gotten Reyes stable enough to move, and Carter was already thinking 3 steps ahead, but already planning the extraction that a few minutes ago had been unthinkable. "Listen up," Carter said, gathering his voice, gathering his men with it. "Here's what's happening. We are not going to sit in this hole and wait to get overrun. Our Overwatch has cracked their formation wide open. There are gaps now, gaps that weren't there before, and we are going to use them." "To do what, boss?" Torres asked. "To live," Carter said simply. "Kane, I want you to find me the weakest point in their line. Delgado, you keep grinding on that air. Ellison Reyes is your only job. You keep him breathing and you keep him moving. When I say go, we move as one element fast and low toward whatever door that angel on the mountain has kicked open for us. Everybody understand, copy, boss?" "Copy." "Understood." And then Reyes, from the ground weak but stubborn, said the thing that none of them had said out loud yet. Sir, whoever's up there, on the ridge, he swallowed, they're saving our lives, and they don't even know if it's working. They can't hear us. They can't see if we make it. They're just doing it on faith. The compound went quiet for a moment, as quiet as it could be with a battle still raging outside its walls. Because Reyes was right, and every man there felt the weight of it. Somewhere above them, a soldier they had never met was spending her ammunition and risking her life for men she couldn't talk to, with no way of knowing whether any of it would matter, whether she was buying their survival or just delaying their deaths. She was doing it anyway. She was doing it on nothing but the belief that it was the right thing to do. Then we don't waste it, Carter said, and his voice broke just slightly, just for a word before it came back, hard and certain. We do not waste 1 second of what she's giving us. Kane, find me that gap. Up on the ridge, Evelyn Hart took a round that punched through the rock inches from her face and drove a splinter of stone into her cheek deep enough that she felt the warm blood run. She didn't flinch. She had stopped flinching a long time ago. She rolled again, came up and found that the hunting party had split, some of them still climbing straight up toward her, others working around to her right to flank her, to catch her in the same kind of trap she'd been breaking apart in the valley all morning. They were good. She had to give them that. They were good and they were disciplined, and there were still 4 of them, and she was one, and her ammunition was running toward empty like sand through a fist. She thought for just a moment about the numbers, about how this was statistically, mathematically the kind of situation that got a soldier killed. 1 against 4 flanked low on ammo, no support, no comms, no exfil. She knew what the odds said. She had spent her whole career being the person who made the odds, the invisible weight on the scale, and now the scale had tipped against her, and she could see exactly how the story of Evelyn Hart was likely to end right here on this cold gray ridge next to Danny Cole. And she found, examining that thought, that she was not afraid of it. She was only afraid of one thing. She was afraid of the 6 men in the valley whom she had not finished protecting. She was afraid of stopping too soon. She was afraid that Danny's last words to her, the last thing he ever gave anyone, would go unanswered because she'd run out of rounds or run out of life before the job was done. So she did not think about the odds anymore. She thought about the next target. She found the flanking man on her right, the closest threat, and she took him clean. And as he fell, she was already tracking left, already breathing, already hunting the next one. The mountain fight was hers to win or lose in the next few minutes. But even now, even with men climbing up to kill her, she kept stealing glances at the valley, kept sending down the occasional precious round to keep the enemy's heavy weapons suppressed, kept holding open the door for Carter's team, even as the door to her own survival swung slowly shut. Boss? Kane's voice cracked with excitement. Boss, I found it's southeast corner. There's a dead space, maybe 40 meters of covered ground. Their fire doesn't reach it. It's a lane. It's a straight lane to that ridge line, and behind it, and boss, I think it leads toward a spot where a bird could set down. Carter felt his heart slam against his ribs. You're sure? I'm sure, but boss, that lane's only open because their positions covering it are dead. The Overwatch cleared it. If she stops shooting, if those positions come back online, that lane closes. Kane looked at him, and the truth passed between them. We've got a window, and I don't know how long she can hold it open. Carter made the decision the way he made all his decisions, fast and complete, with his whole chest behind it. Then we go now. Delgado, tell command extraction point is the southeast dead space. Get me that bird there right now. Everybody on your feet. This is it. We move on my mark. We move as one. We do not stop for anything, and we do not leave anyone behind. Ellison, you've got Reyes. I've got him, boss. Then let's get out of this valley and let's go home. Carter looked at each of his men, these 5 exhausted, bloodied, magnificent men who had followed him into a trap and were about to follow him out of it. And when we get home, he said, we are going to find out who that soldier is up on that mountain. And we are going to make sure the whole world knows what she did today. If she makes it, Torres said quietly. Carter's jaw tightened. She makes it, he said. We all make it. That's the deal. Nobody dies on this mountain today. Not us, not her. He keyed the radio one last time, knowing she couldn't hear him saying it anyway because some things need to be said, whether or not there's anyone to hear them. Hawkeye, this is Carter. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know your name, but you kept my team alive when we should have died, and you're doing it without any promise that it'll work. So I'm making you a promise now. We are coming out. We are getting home. And we are coming back for you." He paused. "Hold on, just a little longer. Help is coming for both of us." And up on the ridge, 800 meters away, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart could not hear a single word of it. She only knew that there were still men trying to kill the SEALs in the valley and still men trying to kill her on the mountain, and that her ammunition was running low, and that Danny was dead, and that she was not going to stop. She settled behind her rifle. She let the world go quiet. She found her next target, and she kept fighting. "On my mark," Carter said, and every man in that ruined compound felt the words land in his chest like a second heartbeat. 3, 2, 1, move. They came out of cover as one body, low and fast, exactly the way Carter had drawn it in his head. And for the first 3 seconds, it was almost quiet, almost gentle, the covered lane, holding just the way Kane had promised. Ellison had Reyes's arm over his shoulder and was half carrying, half dragging the wounded kid across the open ground, and Reyes was gritting his teeth against the pain and moving his own feet as best he could, and Torres and Whitfield were flanking them with their rifles up, and Kane was on point reading the terrain, and Delgado was on Carter's shoulder with the radio, and for 3 whole seconds it worked. Then the enemy saw them. A rifle opened up from a position on the western slope that Hart had not yet cleared, and the rounds came in low and angry, kicking up dirt in a line that walked right toward Ellison and Reyes. "Down," Carter screamed. "Get down, get down." They dropped all of them in the covered lane that had felt like salvation a moment ago. Suddenly felt like a coffin because they were pinned again out in the open now, halfway between the compound and the ridge, with no walls left to hide behind. "Boss, we're exposed," Kane shouted. "We move forward. We're in their fire. We go back. We lose the lane." Carter pressed himself flat and made himself think. He had 6 men strung out across open ground and 1 enemy gun that had them cold, and every second they lay here was a second the rest of the enemy needed to reposition and finish them all. He needed that Western gun gone. He needed it gone right now. And there was only one thing in the world that could make it happen, and she was 800 meters away and had no idea he was even here. "Come on," Carter whispered to the mountain, to the angel he'd never met. "Come on, that Western gun. I know you can't hear me, but I need you right now. I need you." Up on the ridge, Evelyn Hart had not heard him, but she had seen them. She'd caught the movement out of the corner of her scope, the small, dark shapes of men breaking from the compound into the open, and her whole body had gone cold with understanding. The SEALs were making their run. They were coming out, and they'd run straight into a gun she hadn't gotten to yet, a shooter on the western slope she'd been holding off on, because the flanking party climbing toward her had been the more immediate threat to her own life. Now she had to choose again. Same choice as before, only worse. The 2 remaining men of the hunting party were less than 30 meters below her, now close enough that she could hear them calling to each other, close enough that if she turned her rifle away from them for more than a few seconds, they would close the distance and be on top of her. If she took the Western gun to save the SEALs, she exposed herself to the 2 men climbing to kill her. If she took the 2 men to save herself, the Western gun would cut the SEALs down in the open. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took to breathe out. "Sorry, Danny," she whispered. "I'm gonna do the dumb thing again." She swung the rifle away from the men climbing toward her, away from her own survival, and she found the Western gunner 800 meters distant, and she put a single round through him, and he fell silent, and the covered lane opened back up. And in the very same motion, knowing the men below her were already moving, already sensing their moment, she rolled hard to her left, and the burst of fire that would have caught her square in the back instead tore through the empty air where she'd been. Down in the valley, Kane saw the Western gun die. "Lane's open," he roared. "Boss, she cleared it. The lane's open. Move." "Go, go, go." Carter was up and shoving his men forward. "Ellison, get Reyes to that ridge line. Everybody move." They ran. They ran like men who had been given their lives back and knew exactly how fragile the gift was. Reyes found strength he didn't have, and Ellison found strength he didn't have, and they crossed the open ground and reached the fold of rock at the base of the ridge and threw themselves behind it, and for the first time in what felt like a year, there were solid walls of Afghan mountain between them and the guns. "Head count," Carter shouted, chest heaving. "Sound off." Kane, Torres, Whitfield, Delgado, Ellison, Reyes, every voice, every man. Carter closed his eyes for 1 second and let the number wash over him. 6, still 6. He had brought 6 men into the open, and he had brought 6 men out, and the reason was a soldier on a mountain he still had never seen. Delgado, he gasped. Where's my bird? 6 minutes out, boss. They diverted the Black Hawk. It's inbound to the southeast dead space, but boss, Delgado's face was grim. Command saying the enemy's repositioning. They're not done. They're shifting to cover the extraction point. Carter's stomach turned. Of course they were. Of course it wasn't over. It was never over when you thought it was. How many? Command doesn't know, but they said the Overwatch is the only thing keeping the extraction corridor from getting sealed. Delgado looked up. Boss, they can't reach Hawkeye either. Nobody can. She's completely dark. Command's asking if we have eyes on her status. Carter looked up at the distant ridge, that gray spine of rock 800 meters away, where an invisible soldier was at this very moment doing the impossible. Tell Command, he said slowly, that Hawkeye is alive, Hawkeye is engaged, and Hawkeye is the only reason any of us are breathing. He swallowed. And tell them she's out there alone, and if there's any way at all to get help to her position, they need to do it because she has been carrying this entire operation on her back, and I don't know how much longer she can carry it. He didn't know the half of it, because at that exact moment up on the ridge, Evelyn Hart had run out of good options entirely. The 2 men from the hunting party had used the seconds she'd spent saving the seals to close the last of the distance. They were on her level now, no longer below her, spread out among the rocks less than 20 meters away, and they had her pinned in a shallow depression with no way to move that didn't expose her. She was flat on her belly, her rifle in front of her, and she could not lift her head to aim without giving them the shot. She lay still and listened. She heard them talking low and fast, coordinating. She heard one of them moving right, trying to get an angle. She had maybe 15 seconds before they had her boxed, and once they had her boxed, she was finished. She looked at her rifle. She looked at the terrain, and she did the thing that no one expects a sniper to do, because a sniper's whole existence is about distance, about reaching out and touching death from far away, about never ever letting the enemy get close. She let go of the rifle. She drew her sidearm, a compact pistol that had never in 8 years and 3 deployments been anything more than a piece of gear she cleaned and holstered and never fired in anger. And she came up out of that depression, not away from the 2 men, but toward them, closing the distance instead of fleeing it, because the one thing they would not expect from a cornered sniper was aggression. The first man was closer than she'd guessed, and he swung his rifle toward her, and she shot him twice in the chest before his barrel came level, and he went down. The second man was to her right, already turning, already firing, and she felt the round burn across her upper arm like a line of fire, and she did not stop. She pivoted into it, and she put 2 rounds into him, and he dropped, and then there was silence. Hart stood in the middle of it, breathing hard, her arm bleeding, her pistol still up and sweeping for the next threat. But there was no next threat, not from the hunting party. She had killed all of them. Every last man who had climbed this mountain to end her, she had ended first. She looked down at her arm. The wound was ugly but shallow, a graze painful but not disabling. She had been shot. She noted it the way she noted the wind, or the range of fact to be accounted for, nothing more. She holstered the pistol and dropped back to her rifle and got behind it, and only then, only when her eye found the scope again, did her hands finally start to shake. She let them shake for exactly 1 second. Then she made them stop. Not yet, she told them. You can shake later. Not yet. Because down in the valley through her scope, she could see the seals had reached the ridgeline, could see them clustered in the cover at its base, and she understood what came next. She understood it before Carter did because she had the high ground and the long view, and she could see the enemy doing exactly what Delgado's command had warned about. She could see fighters peeling off from the collapsed ambush and moving fast and purposeful toward the southeast, toward the flat stretch of ground where a helicopter would have to land. They were going to seal the extraction point. They were going to let the SEALs think they'd escaped, and then they were going to destroy the aircraft as it came in and destroy the men as they tried to board and turn a rescue into a massacre. And Evelyn Hart was the only human being alive who could see it happening in time to stop it. All right, she said. She checked her ammunition, and the number she found was not a number she liked. Below critical now. The pistol fight, the two-front battle, the long morning of impossible shots, it had all added up. And she was down to what a sniper carries when a sniper is nearly out. She counted her remaining rounds, and she counted the enemy moving toward the landing zone, and the two numbers did not balance. There were more of them than she had bullets if she wasted a single one. "So don't waste any," she said. Danny's voice again. Always Danny's voice now running underneath her own. Everyone counts, Evie. Every single one. Down at the base of the ridge, Carter was organizing his men for the final push to the extraction point, and he did not yet know that the enemy was already there, already waiting, already setting the trap. He was about to lead his 6 men out of cover and into a killing field for the second time in one morning. "Listen up," he said. "The bird's coming into the dead space southeast 4 minutes out. We move on my mark, same as before, fast and low, one element. Kane, you've got a point. Ellison Reyes stays with you. We get to that LZ, we set security, and we get everybody on that bird the second it touches down. Questions?" "No questions, boss," Kane said. Then, "Wait." It was Delgado, his hand pressed to his earpiece, his face gone pale. "Wait, boss. Command's got drone feed overhead now. They're seeing movement at the LZ. Boss, there's already enemy at the extraction point. They're set up. They're waiting for the bird." He looked up. "If we move now, we're walking right into it." The words dropped into the group like a stone into still water. For a moment, nobody spoke. They had been so close. They had fought their way out of the compound across the open ground to the ridge, and now the last stretch, the final 40 meters to salvation, was a trap waiting to spring. "How many at the LZ?" Carter asked. "Drone counts 8, maybe 10. They've got at least 2 RPG teams positioned to hit the bird on approach." Delgado swallowed. "Boss, if that Blackhawk comes in and those RPG teams are live, they'll knock it out of the sky. And if it aborts, we're stuck out here with no exfil and the whole enemy force converging on us." Carter felt the trap close around his mind, the same way it had closed around the valley. Damned if the bird came, damned if it didn't. He looked at his men, at Reyes, barely conscious now, against Ellison's shoulder, at the exhaustion carved into every face, and he knew they didn't have another fight in them. Not against a prepared position with rockets. Not like this. "We need those RPG teams gone before the bird gets here," Carter said. "Or that helicopter is a coffin for everybody on it, us and the crew both." He looked up at the ridge, at the mountain, at the impossible soldier who had already saved them once. "We need her, one more time. We need her to do it one more time." But there was no way to ask. There was no way to tell her. She was dark, deaf, blind to their radio working entirely on her own rid of the battlefield. Carter could only look up at that distant gray ridge and pray that whoever she was still watching, still seeing, still willing. She was. Evelyn Hart had already found the first RPG team. 2 men positioned in a rock cleft with a perfect line of sight on the helicopter's approach path, waiting patiently for a target that would arrive in minutes. She settled on the first man. She thought about her ammunition. She thought about the 8 or 10 enemy at the LZ and the handful of rounds she had left, and she knew with cold clarity that she was about to spend the last of everything. "Okay, Danny," she breathed. "Last set. Let's make it count." She fired. The first RPG gunner slumped. His partner spun toward the sound, and she took him too before he could find cover, before he could even understand that the death of his friend had come from 800 meters away. 2 rounds, 2 men, 1 RPG team erased. Down at the base of the ridge, Delgado's eyes went wide. Boss, the drone just saw one of the RPG teams go down. Both of them just dropped, and there was no fire from the LZ. Nobody down there shot them. He looked up at the mountain, and his voice dropped to something like reverence. It's her, boss. She can see the LZ from up there. She's clearing it for us. She's clearing the extraction point. A ragged, disbelieving hope moved through the 6 men. Kane actually laughed, a short, broken sound. She's still going, he said. After everything, she's still up there, still working. Boss, who is this woman? I don't know, Carter said quietly. But when this is over, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure everybody does. Up on the ridge, Hart had already shifted to the second RPG team, and this one was harder. They were better concealed, tucked deep into cover, showing her almost nothing to shoot at. She waited. She breathed. She let precious seconds tick by because a wasted shot was a shot she couldn't afford, and she needed them to expose themselves, needed just an inch of a man to put a round through. And as she waited, she became aware of something behind her. A sound, the smallest scrape of boot on rocks somewhere down the reverse slope of her own position behind and below her. She went cold all over again. There were more of them, a second group, a counter-ambush working up the back of her ridge while she'd been focused on the valley and the LZ. She'd been so locked on to clearing the extraction point that she'd let them get close, and now they were behind her, coming up the one direction where she wasn't watching, and she was nearly out of ammunition, and the second RPG team was still live and waiting to kill the helicopter, and the SEALs were down at the base of the ridge, with their entire survival hanging on. Whether she could finish a job, she no longer had the bullets to finish. For one terrible moment, Evelyn Hart felt the whole impossible weight of it, all of it at once, and she felt something in her that had held all morning begin finally to bend. And then she thought about Danny's face, and she thought about the 6 men in the valley whose names she didn't even know. And she found underneath the exhaustion and the fear and the pain in her bleeding arm one last hard core of refusal that would not break. "No," she said. "Not yet, not while I can still pull a trigger." She made a decision that no manual would ever endorse. She left the second RPG team for one more moment, turned her rifle back toward the reverse slope, toward the sounds of the men climbing up behind her, and she waited for the first one to show himself. He did. A shoulder, an arm, a head edging around a boulder 15 meters below her. She took him. He fell. And in the half-second of shock that his death bought her, she whipped the rifle back toward the valley, toward the second RPG team, and one of them had finally leaned out to check on the helicopter's approach. She had one clean shot. She had, by her count, almost the last of her rifle rounds. She let out her breath, held it at the bottom, and squeezed. The second RPG gunner dropped. The extraction point was clear. "LZ's clear," Delgado nearly shouted it. "Boss, the second RPG team's down. Drone confirms both anti-air threats neutralized. The corridor's open." "Then the bird can come in," Carter said, and relief cracked through his voice. "Delgado, tell command the corridor is clear. Get that Black Hawk in here now. Now. Birds inbound." 2 minutes. But up on the ridge, Evelyn Hart had no more rifle rounds. She checked, and there was nothing, the chamber empty, the magazine spent. Every long-range round she had carried up this mountain was gone, spent on machine gunners and RPG teams and mortar crews and spotters and hunting parties, spent on the lives of 6 men in a valley, and the crew of an aircraft she would never meet. Her rifle, the tool that had made her who she was now just weight. And behind her, the counter-ambush was still coming. She'd killed one of them, but there were more close now, closing in, and all she had left was her sidearm, and however many rounds remained in it after the fight with the hunting party. She drew the pistol. She checked it. Not many, not nearly enough. "Okay," she said, and her voice was steady even now, even here. "Okay, close and personal then, one more time." The first of the counter-ambush came over the lip of the reverse slope, and she shot him. The second was right behind, and she shot him too. And then she was moving, breaking from her position, because a stationary target was a dead target evading through the rocks. She knew by heart now, after a whole morning on this ridge, using the terrain, the way she'd used it against everyone else, only now with a pistol instead of a rifle and a body running on nothing but will. Down below, the Black Hawk came screaming in over the last ridge, flaring hard into the southeast. Dead space, its rotors kicking up a storm, and Carter was up and shoving his men toward it. "That's our bird. Everybody up, everybody. Move Ellison. Get Reyes on that helo. Go, go, go." They ran the last 40 meters, and this time the ground stayed quiet. The killing field silent because a soldier on a mountain had emptied herself completely to make it so. They reached the Black Hawk, and the crew chief was screaming at them to load up, and they threw Reyes aboard, and then Ellison, and then Torres, and Whitfield, and Delgado, and Kane, and finally Carter had one foot on the skid and one hand on the frame, and he stopped. He stopped with the helicopter screaming around him, and safety one step away, and he turned and looked back up at the ridge. "Boss," Kane grabbed his vest. "Boss, get on the bird. We gotta go." "She's still up there," Carter said. He couldn't see her. He couldn't hear her. But he knew with a certainty that went past all reason that Staff Sergeant, whoever she was still on that mountain, still fighting, still alone. "She cleared our whole extraction. She took the RPG teams. She's still fighting up there, and we're about to fly away and leave her. Boss, we can't reach her. We don't have a way to... Then we make one. Carter climbed back off the skid onto the ground into the storm of the rotors, and he grabbed the crew chief by the harness and pointed up at the ridge. There's a friendly element on that high ground, 800 meters northwest ridgeline. She's the reason you have an LZ to land in. I am not leaving this valley until we have a plan to get her out. Do you understand me? The crew chief shouted back over the noise. Sir, we can't put down on that ridge. There's no room, and it's hot. But there's an Apache inbound 2 minutes out tasked to clear the corridor. If your element can hold on for 2 more minutes, that gunship can suppress everything on that ridge and open a window. 2 minutes. Carter looked up at the mountain. 2 minutes was nothing. 2 minutes was forever. 2 minutes was exactly the kind of time that a soldier down to her last pistol rounds might not have. Delgado, Carter shouted. The Apache, can we talk to it? Can we get it to that ridge? Working it, boss. Delgado was already on the radio and his voice was fast and desperate. Apache, this is Ranger Element. On the deck, we have a friendly overwatch position on the northwest ridge. 800 meters. She is danger close with enemy. We need you to suppress everything around her position, but do not hit the ridge. Crest, friendly, is on the ridge crest. Do you copy? Up on that ridge crest, Evelyn Hart had backed herself into the last defensible position. She had a cluster of boulders near the very top, and she had 2 rounds left in her pistol, and there were still 3 men working toward her through the rocks. She could hear them. She could feel them closing. She pressed her back against the cold stone and held the pistol in both hands, and she thought, this is it. This is the ridge where it ends. And she found she could make her peace with that. She really could, because she had done the thing she came to do. The SEALs were out. She'd seen the Black Hawk come in. She'd cleared the corridor. Whatever happened to her now, she had answered Danny's last request. She had not let them die because a rule said she had to watch. That's good enough, she whispered. Danny, that's good enough, isn't it? We did good. She heard a man move to her left. She turned the pistol toward the sound. 1 round for him if he showed himself. 1 round left after that, and then whatever came, came. And then she heard something else. A new sound, distant at first, and then rising, a deep mechanical thunder rolling in from the south. A sound every soldier in that valley knew in their bones. The sound of 30 millimeters of American fury, inbound at 150 knots. An AH-64 Apache came over the southern ridge like the wrath of God, and it saw the battlefield the way only a gunship could see it, and somewhere in a cockpit, 2 pilots were listening to a desperate Ranger on the ground, telling them exactly where the friendly was and exactly where she wasn't. Danger close, a voice crackled, and it was not in Hart's ear because she had no radio, but it was in the air, in the thunder, in the way the entire world below her ridge suddenly erupted. Friendly on the crest, suppressing the reverse slope. The Apache opened up. In the reverse slope of Evelyn Hart's ridge, the ground where 3 men had been climbing to kill her disappeared in a hammering line of cannon fire that walked across the mountainside with terrible precision, close enough that Hart felt the impacts through the rock, close enough that debris rained down over her boulders, but never not once touching the crest where she lay. The 3 men who had been coming for her were simply gone. And Evelyn Hart, flat behind her boulders, with 2 rounds left in a pistol and a graze bleeding down her arm, and her dead spotter's voice still running underneath her, Owen looked up as the Apache thundered overhead, and she understood all at once what it meant. They knew she was there. Somehow, impossibly, they knew. The SEALs, she had never spoken to the men she'd saved on faith, with no way of knowing if it worked. They had made it out, and they had not left her, and they had sent this down from the sky to tell her the one thing she had not let herself believe all morning. She was not alone. She was not going to die on this mountain. They were coming for her. Down in the dead space, Carter watched the Apache work, the ridge, watched the reverse slope come apart under its guns, and he keyed his radio, and he said the words, even though she couldn't hear them, said them for himself as much as for her. That's it, he said. That's your window. That's us coming back for you just like I promised. Hold on, just hold on. We are not leaving without you. And for the first time all day, high up on that gray Afghan ridge, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart let herself lower the pistol. She let herself breathe. And she let the tears she'd held back since the moment Danny Cole died finally come quiet and hot, running down through the dust and the blood on her face as the Apache circled overhead and the sound of rescue filled the valley. She had refused all alone to surrender. The tears lasted only a moment. Evelyn Hart had learned a long time ago that the mountain didn't care whether you cried, and neither did the enemy, and a soldier who let herself fall apart while the fight was still live was a soldier who didn't come home. So she wiped her face with the back of her bloodied hand, and she made herself think, and the first thought that came to her was cold and clear and correct. The Apache had cleared her reverse slope, but an Apache could not stay forever. It had fuel, and it had a mission, and it had a whole valley of enemy to worry about, and the moment it broke off to work another part of the battlefield, the men who had been trying to kill her would have a clear run at her position again, if there were any left. And she had 2 pistol rounds. 2. That was the entire arsenal of Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart, the deadliest single soldier in this valley, the woman who had killed more than 20 enemy fighters in the span of a morning. 2 rounds and a rifle with nothing to feed it. Think, she told herself. You've got maybe 90 seconds before that bird moves on. Use it. Down in the southeast dead space, Carter was thinking the same thing, running the same clock in his own head. The Black Hawk was on the ground with his 6 men aboard rotors, spinning, screaming at him to load up, and the crew chief was out of patience. Sir, we cannot sit here, the crew chief shouted. We are a stationary target. Every second we're on the deck is a second they range us. I need you on this bird now. I'm not leaving her, Carter shouted back. Then you're going to die for nothing, because if this bird gets hit, we all die and she still doesn't get out. The crew chief grabbed a fistful of Carter's vest. You want to save her? Get on the bird. Get to altitude and coordinate her extraction from the air, where you can actually see the whole battlefield. Standing here in the dirt, you can't do a thing for her. And that stopped Carter cold because the man was right. That was the terrible truth of it. Standing here at the base of the mountain, he was blind and useless. The only way to help her was to do the one thing that felt like betrayal, which was to climb aboard that helicopter and fly away from her. Boss, it was Kane leaning out of the Black Hawk, his hand extended. Boss, he's right. We get up top. We can talk to the Apache. We can talk to command. We can run her exfil. But we gotta go. Right now, trust me. Trust the plan. We don't leave her. We just fight for her from up there. Carter looked up at the ridge one more time. He couldn't see her. He would never in that moment have believed that 800 meters away, a woman with 2 bullets and a dead spotter was at that very second making the exact same calculation, deciding that the only way to survive was to move to trust, to keep going. All right, Carter said, and it cost him something to say it. All right, but Delgado, you keep that Apache on station over her ridge as long as you possibly can. And the second we're airborne, you get me every asset in this theater looking at that mountain. We are getting her out. That is the mission now. Everything else is secondary. Do you copy, Tom? Copy, boss. Delgado's jaw was tight. We get her out. Carter grabbed Kane's hand and hauled himself aboard, and the crew chief screamed, "Go, go, go!" into his mic, and the Black Hawk lifted off in a storm of dust and clawed for altitude. And Carter pressed his face to the open door and stared at the ridge as it fell away beneath him, and he made himself a promise, silent and absolute, that this would not be the last he saw of the soldier on that mountain. Up on the ridge, Hart heard the Black Hawk's engine note change, heard it lift, heard it climb, and for one gut-dropping second she thought they're leaving. They got what they came for and they're gone. And she couldn't blame them. She had to have made the same call. You don't lose an aircraft and a crew to save one soldier who's probably already dead. That was the math. She knew the math. She'd lived her whole career inside the math. But then she noticed the Apache didn't leave with them. The Apache stayed. It circled her ridge low and mean its cannon swinging back and forth across the slopes, and she understood slowly that the Black Hawk lifting off wasn't abandonment. It was repositioning. Somebody up there was still thinking about her. Somebody up there had left the gunship parked over her head like a guardian. Okay, she breathed. Okay, you didn't forget me, all right? But the Apache's presence created a new problem, and Hart saw it before anyone in the air did. The gunship was suppressing her ridge, keeping the enemy's heads down, and that was buying her life second by second. But it also meant she couldn't move, because to move meant to break cover, and the Apache's guns didn't know where a running figure would end up, and danger close meant danger close. If she broke from her boulders and sprinted, she'd be a shape in the open in the middle of a strafing run, and 30 millimeters didn't leave much of a person who caught even the edge of it. So she was pinned again, pinned by her own rescue. Safe as long as she stayed still, dead the moment she moved, and unable to be extracted from a position that no helicopter could reach. "There's always a catch," she muttered. "Danny, there's always a catch. You remember? You always said that. Every time something goes right, there's a catch." She almost smiled. And then she got back to work because self-pity had never once kept her alive, and it wasn't going to start now. 2,000 feet up and climbing the Black Hawk leveled off, and Carter finally had what he'd needed all morning, which was altitude and a view of the whole valley at once. And what he saw made his blood run cold and hot at the same time. He could see the ridge. He could see, tiny and distant, the cluster of boulders near the crest where a single friendly icon had to be huddled. And he could see spread across the reverse slopes and the folds of rock below her, the enemy. Not gone, not beaten, regrouping. Fewer than before, far fewer, because she had spent the morning cutting them down, but still, there's still, dangerous still, between Evelyn Hart and any hope of getting off that mountain alive. "Delgado, get me the Apache," Carter said. "Direct." A moment later, the gunship pilot's voice came through, calm and professional, the voice of a man doing surgery with a cannon. "Ranger Element, this is Hammer 2-6. I am on station over your friendly's position. I've got her pinned in a rock cluster near the crest, and I count enemy massing below her, but I cannot engage danger close indefinitely. I'm burning fuel fast, and I've gone away to talk to your friendly to coordinate. She doesn't have comms. Every pass I make, I'm guessing where she'll be. Sooner or later, I clip her by accident. What's your plan?" Carter closed his eyes. That was the whole nightmare laid out in one radio call. She had no comms. She couldn't be talked to, couldn't be told when to move, couldn't be coordinated with, couldn't be extracted from where she was, and couldn't survive if the one thing keeping her alive flew away. "How long can you stay on station?" Carter asked. "Realistically, 8 minutes. Maybe 10 if I nurse it. After that, I'm Winchester and bingo both, and I have to break for the FARP, or I don't make it back myself." 8 minutes. Carter's mind raced. In 8 minutes, he had to solve an unsolvable problem. He had to get a soldier who couldn't hear him off a mountain. No helicopter could land on past an enemy that outnumbered her with a gunship that was about to run out of fuel and bullets. "Kane," Carter said, "talk to me. Give me options." Kane was already thinking, his big calm face working through it. "She's a Ranger sniper, boss. She knows how to move under fire. She knows how to read a gunship. If we can just give her a lane, a covered route down the far side of that ridge to a spot where the Black Hawk can pick her up, she'll take it. She doesn't need us to carry her. She just needs a door." "She doesn't know where the door is," Carter said. "She can't hear us. She's got no idea what our plan is. For all she knows, that Apache's going to break off any second and leave her hanging." And that was the moment the whole thing turned. Because Delgado, who had been quiet listening, working his radio, suddenly looked up with something wild in his eyes. "Boss," he said slowly, "she's a sniper. Snipers don't need to hear us. They watch. They read the battlefield. That's the whole job." He swallowed. "What if we don't talk to her with words? What if we talk to her with the Apache?" Carter stared at him. "Say again." "The gunship, boss. Think about it. She's been watching that Apache work. She's smart. She's the smartest shooter in this whole valley. She's proven that 100 times over this morning. If Hammer 2-6 suppresses in a pattern, a deliberate pattern, if he works the enemy on one specific side of that ridge and leaves another side clean, she'll read it. She'll understand it's not random. She'll see the door we're building for her. We use the gunfire itself as a message. We show her the way out with 30 Mike. For a moment, nobody in the Black Hawk said a word. And then Carter felt something break open in his chest, something like hope, sharper and more desperate than any he'd felt all day. "That's it," he breathed. "That's it, Delgado. That's how we talk to her." He keyed the radio. "Hammer 2-6 Ranger Element, new plan, and I need you to trust me on this. Our friendly is a Ranger sniper. She reads battlefields for a living. I need you to stop suppressing randomly and start suppressing with intent. I need you to hammer the enemy on the east side of her ridge hard and repeated, and I need you to leave the west side and the north descent completely clean. No fire on the northwest slope. Build her a corridor. Make it obvious. Make it a pattern a smart shooter can't miss." "Can you do that?" There was a pause. Then Hammer 2-6 came back, and there was something new in the pilot's voice, something that might have been respect. "Ranger Element, that is the craziest, smartest thing I've heard all day. You're telling me to write her a message in cannon fire and hope she reads it? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Copy all. Building the corridor now. East side hard and repeated. Northwest slope stays clean. Let's see if your sniper's as good as you say she is. And the Apache banked hard and it came around and it began for the first time to work only the east side of Evelyn Hart's Ridge, hammering the enemy positions there again and again. 3 passes, 4. Its cannon walking the same ground over and over, with a deliberateness that no random suppression would ever have. Up on the crest behind her boulders, Evelyn Hart noticed it on the second pass. She noticed it because noticing things was the entire reason she was alive. She had spent 8 years in 3 deployments, training her mind to see patterns, to read intention in the smallest details, to understand a battlefield the way other people understood a conversation. And this gunship, which had been working her whole ridge in a wide sweeping arc, had suddenly gotten specific. It was hitting the east, only the east, again and again. And it was leaving the northwest slope, the descent down the far side of the ridge, completely conspicuously untouched. She frowned, her sniper's mind turned it over. Random suppression didn't repeat like that. Random suppression covered the whole area of threat. This wasn't random. This was a pilot deliberately, repeatedly working one side and pointedly ignoring another. And there was no tactical reason to do that unless it was a message. No, she whispered. No, that's crazy, that's... But even as she said it, her heart was starting to pound because she knew it in her bones that it wasn't crazy at all. It was exactly what she would do if she were up there and needed to talk to a soldier who couldn't hear a word. She'd stop shooting words and start shooting geometry. She'd draw the way out in fire and pray the person on the ground was smart enough to read it. You're building me a door, she breathed. Tears stung her eyes again, and this time they weren't grief. They were something closer to awe, closer to disbelief, that someone up there had understood her well enough, trusted her mind enough to try something this insane. You're clearing the east, so I know the enemy's dying over there, and you're leaving the northwest clean, so I know that's my lane. You want me to go down the northwest slope. She looked at the northwest descent. It was steep and broken and ugly, but it was covered, folded with rocks she could use, and if the enemy on the east was pinned by that relentless cannon fire, then the northwest really might be clear enough to survive. Okay, she said, and her voice shook and she didn't care. Okay, I hear you, whoever you are. Message received. But she couldn't just run. She had 2 pistol rounds and no idea how many enemy were between her and the bottom of that slope. She needed to time it. She needed to move the exact instant the Apache's next pass hammered the east side and drew every enemy eye and every enemy weapon in that direction. She needed to make her break in the 2 or 3 seconds when the whole battlefield was looking away from her. She got her legs under her. She held the pistol ready. She watched the Apache bank for another run. Delgado Buenan, Carter said up in the Black Hawk, his eyes locked on the ridge. Anything? Any movement? Is she reading it? I can't tell. Boss, she's too small. I can't. Delgado leaned into the door, straining. Wait, there. Boss, there's movement on the crest. Something's moving off the boulders. She's boss. I think she's moving. I think she read it. Carter's heart slammed. Hammer 2-6. She's moving. Our friendly is moving. Keep hammering. That east side. Do not let up. Keep their eyes off the northwest slope. Copy, pouring it on. And down on that ridge in the 2 seconds when the Apache's cannon tore into the east and every surviving enemy fighter flinched and ducked and turned toward the Thunder, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart broke from cover and threw herself down the northwest slope. She moved the way she'd been trained, the way she'd moved 1,000 times, low and fast, and never in a straight line, using every fold of rock, every boulder, every scrap of dead ground. Her wounded arms screamed at her. Her legs were rubber from a morning of holding still under stress. But she moved and the corridor held because 800 meters and 2,000 feet away, a pilot she'd never met was keeping his promise, keeping the enemy pinned to the east while she ran west. 20 meters down, an enemy fighter who hadn't gotten the message, who hadn't turned toward the cannon fire like the others, stepped out from behind a rock directly in her path. They saw each other at the same instant. He raised his rifle, she raised her pistol, and in the fraction of a second that decided everything Evelyn Hart did, what she had done all morning, what she would do until the day she died, which was not hesitate. She fired. One of her 2 rounds. It took him center mass and he folded, and she was past him before he hit the ground running one bullet left down the slope toward a bottom she couldn't see, and a rescue she could only pray was coming. She dropped one, Delgado shouted. Boss, she just dropped. An enemy on the slope, and she's still moving. She's still going. Where's she headed? Carter demanded. Delgado, where does that northwest slope bottom out? Is there anywhere a bird can put down? Kane was already looking, already reading the terrain from the air. There, boss, he pointed. Bottom of the northwest slope, there's a shelf, a flat spot maybe 40 meters across. It's tight, but the Black Hawk could make it. If she gets there, we can get her out. Crew chief, Carter turned. That shelf at the bottom of the northwest slope, can you put down on it? The crew chief leaned out, assessed it with a pilot's cold eye. It's tight and it's hot, but yeah, I can get one skid on it long enough for her to jump aboard. But sir, I can only do it once, and I can only hold it for seconds. She has to be there, she has to be ready, and she has to be fast, because the second we flare into that shell, every enemy on that mountain is going to range us. Then we time it perfect, Carter said. We put down the exact second she reaches the bottom. Delgado, you are my eyes on her. You call her position every second you do not lose her. Do you understand me? I've got her, boss. She's 2/3 down. She's moving good. Delgado's voice cut off. Boss, there's a problem. What? What problem? The enemy on the east side, they're figuring it out. The Apache's fire is starting to slack because Hammer 2-6 is running low, and they're starting to realize she's not on the crest anymore. Some of them are peeling off the east side and moving to the northwest. Boss, they're going to try to cut her off before she reaches the bottom. Carter's stomach dropped. Hammer 2-6, how's your ammo? The gunship pilot's voice was tight now for the first time all day. Ranger element, I am almost Winchester on the gun. I've got maybe 2 more good passes, and then I'm dry. And I'm past bingo fuel I should have broken off 2 minutes ago. I can give you 2 more passes. That's all I've got. Make 'em count. 2 passes. 2 bursts of cannon fire, and then the one thing that had kept Evelyn Hart alive would be gone, and she'd be on that slope with 1 pistol round, an enemy converging to cut her off in a helicopter that could only hold its landing for seconds. Okay, Carter said, and his voice was iron now because this was the moment, this was the whole morning coming down to the next 90 seconds. Okay, here's how we do this. Hammer 2-6. I need your 2 passes on the enemy moving to cut her off on the northwest, not the east anymore. The northwest, the ones trying to flank her descent. You hit them, you buy her the bottom of that slope. Can you do it? Shifting to the northwest flankers now. 2 passes. Then I'm gone. Crew chief, the instant Hammer 2-6 starts his first pass, you start your approach to that shelf. I want us flaring into that landing the same second she reaches the bottom. We are going to thread this needle so tight, there's no room for a prayer. Everybody understand the plan. Copy, boss. Understood. Let's get her. And it happened fast, then faster than any of them could quite track everything at once. The Apache rolled in on his first pass and tore into the enemy fighters scrambling to cut off Hart's descent, and they broke and scattered under the cannon fire and had bought her the seconds she needed. The Black Hawk banked hard and dove toward the shelf at the bottom of the slope, the crew chief flying it like he was threading a needle at 100 knots. And Evelyn Hart, 1 pistol round, left her arm bleeding, her legs failing, ran the last of the northwest slope with everything she had left in her body because she could see the shelf now. She could see it, and she could see the Black Hawk coming down toward it, and she understood that the whole thing the entire morning, all of it came down to whether she could reach that flat piece of ground at the same instant that helicopter did. Come on, she gasped, her lungs burning. Come on, come on, come on. She's almost there. Delgado was nearly screaming. Boss, she's 50 meters from the shelf, 40. She's going to make it. She's going to... An enemy fighter that the Apache had missed rose up from behind a rock 10 meters from the shelf, right at the bottom of Hart's descent, right where she had to pass to reach the helicopter. He had a clear shot at her. She was running full tilt off balance, exhausted, and he had her cold. And Evelyn Hart used her last bullet. She didn't stop running. She didn't even slow down. She brought the pistol up on the move in the space of a single stride, and she fired her final round, and it caught the fighter in the throat, and he went down, and she leaped over his falling body and hit the shelf at a dead sprint as the Black Hawk flared into the landing beside her in a hurricane of dust and noise. She's on the shelf, Delgado howled. She's on the shelf. She made it. Get her on the bird. Kane was already hanging out the door. His arm extended, screaming her name, even though he didn't know her name, screaming, "Grab my hand, soldier, we got you, grab my hand." And Evelyn Hart, out of ammunition, out of blood, out of everything except the last raw scrap of will that had carried her through the worst morning of her life, threw her empty pistol aside and reached up and caught Kane's hand. He hauled her aboard with a strength born of pure adrenaline, and Carter grabbed her vest and pulled, and Torres grabbed her arm, and the three of them dragged Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart into the belly of that Black Hawk. As the crew chief screamed, "I've got her, go, go, go," and the helicopter tore off the shelf and clawed for the sky. For 1 second, one single suspended second, nobody said anything. Evelyn Hart lay on the floor of the Black Hawk chest, heaving blood running from her arm, her face streaked with dust and tears, and the grime of a battle no one on that aircraft would ever fully be able to describe. And around her, 6 SEALs stared down at her, at the soldier who had saved every one of their lives, the angel on the mountain, the invisible shooter who had turned a massacre into a rescue, and they saw for the first time that she was real, that she was a person, that she was one exhausted, bleeding, magnificent human being who had done all of it alone. Carter dropped to his knees beside her. He didn't know what to say. In 14 years, he had never not known what to say, and now the words wouldn't come. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, and finally he managed the only thing that mattered. "You're gonna be okay," he said. "You hear me? We got you. You're safe. You're gonna be okay." Hart looked up at him, at this SEAL commander she'd only ever seen as a tiny figure 800 meters below her, and something in her face crumpled just slightly, just for a moment before she pulled it back together. "Your team," she said. Her voice was a wreck. "You're 6. Did everybody," Carter said, and his own voice broke on it. "Every one of my men is on this bird alive because of you. 6 for 6. You brought us all home." And Evelyn Hart closed her eyes and let her head fall back against the floor of the helicopter. And for the first time since the moment Danny Cole died on that ridge, she let herself stop. Ellison was already on her, cutting away the sleeve, working on her arm, and he looked up at Carter and gave a small nod that meant she'd live, and the tension that had held every man on that aircraft rigid for the last hour finally began slowly to release. But Hart's eyes came open again, and she grabbed Carter's wrist hard with a grip that surprised him, the same grip Danny had used on her hours before. "My spotter," she said. "Sergeant Cole, Danny, he's still up there, on the ridge. He didn't make it, but I couldn't. I had to leave him. I had to leave him up there, and Her composure, the iron composure that had gotten her through the impossible, finally cracked all the way through. "I left him. I left my spotter on that mountain." Carter took her hand in both of his. "We're going back for him," he said, and there was no hesitation in it, none at all. "You hear me? Nobody stays on that mountain, not him. We know exactly where he is. We are going back for Sergeant Cole, and we are bringing him home, and he is going to be treated like the hero he is. I give you my word. I give you my word as a SEAL." Hart stared at him, and something in her eyes, some last thing that had been holding on all morning, finally let go, and she nodded once, and the tears came freely now, and no one on that helicopter thought any less of her for them. They thought more of her, if anything, because they understood, all of them, that the woman who had killed more than 20 enemy fighters and saved 7 lives without a single word of thanks or recognition was crying not for herself, not for her wound, not for the impossible things she'd survived, but for the man she'd had to leave behind. Carter looked around at his men, at Kane and Torres and Whitfield and Delgado and Ellison and Reyes, all of them alive, all of them watching this soldier they owed everything to, and he made them all a silent promise that matched the one he'd made her. The world was going to know her name, whatever it took, however long it took. The world was going to know what Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart had done on that mountain alone, with nothing but a rifle and a refusal to let good men die. The Black Hawk climbed into the clear, cold sky and turned toward home, and behind it the valley that had been a death trap at dawn fell silent at last, and somewhere on a gray ridge a fallen spotter waited for the promise to be kept. The promise did not keep itself. Carter learned that the moment the Black Hawk touched down at the forward operating base, and the machinery of the military took over the way it always did, with its forms and its chains of command, and its careful, bloodless procedures that could turn the most extraordinary morning of a person's life into a stack of paperwork. They took Evelyn Hart straight to the aid station, and Carter walked beside the stretcher every step of the way because some part of him was afraid that if he let her out of his sight, the system would swallow her, would file her away, would let what she'd done disappear into a classified folder that no one would ever open again. He'd seen it happen. He'd seen soldiers do impossible things in valleys with no names and watched it all vanish because the mission was dark and the details were sensitive and the paperwork was easier if nobody talked about it. "I'm staying with her," Carter told the medical officer who tried to wave him off. It was not a request. "Sir, got your own injuries. You need to be cleared. I said I'm staying with her." Carter's voice was quiet and it left no room at all. "That soldier saved my entire team this morning. 6 of my men are alive because of her. She is not going to lie in this aid station alone while everybody figures out whose report she belongs in. I'm staying." The medical officer looked at him, at the blood and the dust and the thing in Carter's eyes that any soldier recognized, and he stopped arguing. Hart drifted in and out while they worked on her arm. The graze was worse than she'd let on, up on the mountain deep enough to need real attention, and the exhaustion had finally caught up with her all at once, the way it does when the fight is over and the body finally understands it's allowed to fall apart. But every time her eyes opened, they went to the same place. Not to her wound, not to the ceiling, to the door. "Is he here yet?" she said the 3rd or 4th time she surfaced. "Danny, Sergeant Cole, did they bring him down?" Carter leaned close. "They've got a recovery team spinning up right now," he said. "I made the call myself the second we landed. They know exactly where he is. They're going to bring him home. I promise you." "You already promised me that." Her eyes found his, and even half-conscious, even wrecked, there was a sharpness in them that he was beginning to understand was just who she was. "On the bird. You promised me on the bird, so don't promise me again. Just tell me when it's done." "I'll tell you when it's done," Carter said, word for word, the second I know. She nodded and let her eyes close again, and Carter sat back and felt something twist in his chest because he'd met a lot of hard soldiers in 14 years. But he'd rarely met one who, bleeding on a table after doing the impossible, cared about nothing in the world except a dead man she couldn't save anymore. The recovery took 4 hours. 4 hours in which Carter did not sleep, did not eat, did not leave the aid station except once to stand outside and make 3 phone calls that he probably wasn't authorized to make to people above his pay grade, to make absolutely certain that a bird was in the air and a team was on that ridge, and Sergeant Danny Cole was coming down off that mountain with the dignity he was owed. When Carter came back inside, Kane was there, and Torres and Delgado, all of them cleaned up now, but none of them willing to rack out, all of them keeping a silent vigil in the corners of the aid station for a soldier they'd known for less than a day and would remember for the rest of their lives. "How is she?" Kane asked quietly. "Stubborn," Carter said. "Won't rest till they bring Cole down." Kane nodded slowly. "You know what she did up there, boss? I've been running it back in my head, over and over, what she actually did." He shook his head. "She had 200 meters of open sky between her and us, and no comms, and she chose to fight. Nobody ordered her. Nobody even knew she was alive. She could have stayed dark, waited it out, and nobody in the world would have ever blamed her. She'd have been a survivor of a bad ambush. Instead, she stood up and took on 30 men by herself because we were dying, and she could see it." He looked at Carter. "I've been doing this 11 years. I've never seen anything like it. I don't think anybody has." "No," Carter said, "neither have I." At the 4-hour mark, the sergeant Carter didn't recognize appeared in the doorway of the aid station and found him. "Lieutenant Commander Carter, the recovery element is back. They've got him." A pause. "Sergeant Cole, they brought him home." Carter was on his feet immediately. He went to Hart's bedside and crouched down and put his hand on her shoulder, and her eyes opened instantly the way a soldier's eyes open all the way awake in half a second. "It's done," Carter said. "Danny's home. The recovery team's back. They brought him down off that mountain, and he's here, and he's going to be handled with full honors every step of the way. It's done, Sergeant Hart. You didn't leave him. Nobody left him. He's home." For a long moment, Evelyn Hart didn't say anything at all. And then her face, which had held together through the ambush, in the two-front fight, in the pistol duel, in the descent, in the wound and everything else, finally came apart quietly, completely, and she turned her head away. and wept, and Carter kept his hand on her shoulder and let her and the SEALs in the corners of the room looked at the floor and gave her the only privacy they could. When she could speak again, she wiped her face and looked back at Carter, and her voice was raw but steady. He had a wife, she said, 11 months married. He carried her picture in his helmet band. Every mission, every ridge, he'd take it out and look at it before we set up. She swallowed hard. Somebody's got to tell her. Somebody's got to tell her what he was. That he wasn't just a name on a form. That he was watching over people right up until the last second of his life. That his last words weren't about himself, they were about saving other people. I'll make sure she knows, Carter said. I'll make sure everybody knows. His last words, Hart said, and she looked past Carter now at something none of them could see, the way Danny himself had looked past her on the mountain. You want to know what they were? He told me not to let those men die because a rule said I had to watch. That was the last thing he ever said. He spent his dying breath telling me to save your team. Her eyes came back, and there was something fierce in them now. So don't you dare let anybody bury this. Don't you let them classify it into a hole. What happened on that mountain, what he did, what he told me to do, that mattered. That's the last thing he ever gave the world. It matters. It matters, Carter said. So I swear to you on my own life it matters, and I will not let it disappear. The next morning, 72 hours before Carter expected any of it, the machinery began to move in a different direction than he'd feared. Because word had gotten out. Not through official channels, not at first. Through the men. Through 6 SEALs who could not stop talking about the soldier who'd saved them. Through a Black Hawk crew who'd flown the impossible extraction. Through an Apache pilot named in a debrief who'd written a message to a stranger in cannon fire and watched her read it. The story moved the way the truest stories always move in the military, soldier to soldier, in mess halls, in ready rooms, and over secure lines. And by the time it reached the people who write reports and pin on medals, it had a momentum that no amount of caution could stop. They convened a formal debrief, a real one with senior officers, with intelligence personnel, with the drone footage and the radio recordings, and the reconstructed timeline of the entire engagement laid out minute by minute. And Carter sat in that room, still bruised, and watched a colonel walk through what Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart had done, and he watched the faces of men who had seen a great deal of war slowly change as the scale of it became clear. 23 confirmed kills, the colonel said, reading from the reconstruction. More than 30 enemy fighters neutralized or disabled across a single engagement. Enemy heavy weapons systematically eliminated both machine gun positions. Multiple RPG teams, a mortar crew, spotters, coordinators, a flanking element, a counter ambush, and finally the anti-air positions that would have destroyed the extraction aircraft. All of it, the colonel said, and here his voice changed slightly, accomplished by a single operator. One soldier, one rifle, and one sidearm, acting without orders, without communications, without support, and without any way of knowing whether her actions were succeeding. The room was silent. Carter had been in a lot of debriefs. He had never once heard a room of senior officers go this quiet. A general who had been listening from the end of the table finally spoke. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, he said slowly. Her orders were to observe and report, to engage only high-value targets if directed. And she violated those orders. Carter felt his stomach tighten. Here it was. Here was the place where it could all go wrong, where the machinery could decide that the story of Evelyn Hart was not a story of heroism, but a story of a soldier who broke discipline. And there were people in every army in the world who would see it exactly that way, who would look at what she'd done and see not the 23 enemy dead and the 7 Americans saved, but the single fact that she'd acted without permission. Sir, Carter said before he could stop himself, before anyone could tell him it wasn't his place to speak. May I say something? The general looked at him. You're the SEAL team leader, Carter. Yes, sir. You are on the ground. Say what you need to say. Carter stood. He didn't know if he was supposed to stand, but he stood because some things you say on your feet. Sir, with respect. Yes, Staff Sergeant Hart violated her orders. Her orders said to observe and report. And if she had followed those orders, if she had done exactly what she was told, every single man on my team would be dead right now. He let that sit for a second. I would be dead. Petty Officer Reyes, who's 26 years old, would be dead. 6 families would be getting folded flags this week instead of phone calls telling them their sons and husbands are coming home. That is the difference her decision made. That is what breaking that order bought. Nobody interrupted him. He kept going. Her spotter was killed early in the engagement. Her communications were destroyed in the same burst. She was completely alone on that ridge, cut off with no way to receive orders and no way to report. By the letter of her mission, she had nothing left to do but survive and wait for recovery. And nobody, sir, nobody in this room or any room would have faulted her for doing exactly that. Carter's voice hardened. Instead, she looked down into that valley and she saw men dying, and she saw that she was the only human being on this earth positioned to stop it. And she made a choice that she knew could end her career, could get her killed, could go down in a report exactly like this one as an act of insubordination. She made it anyway, because she decided that the lives of men she had never met were worth more than her own career and her own safety. He looked around the table at every face. You want to talk about high-value targets, sir? Her orders said, engage high-value targets. I'd argue every one of those 30 enemy fighters became a high-value target the moment they started killing American servicemen. I'd argue she interpreted her orders in the only way a soldier with a conscience could interpret them. And I'd argue that if this military punishes a soldier for making that choice, then we are telling every future soldier that the safe thing, the correct thing is to watch good men die and call it following orders. The room stayed silent for a long moment after Carter finished. He didn't know if he'd helped her or hurt her. He didn't know if he'd just talked his way into a reprimand of his own. He didn't care. He'd said the true thing, and the true thing needed saying. The general looked at him for a long time. Then he looked down at the reconstruction on the table at the timeline of an impossible morning at the number 23, at the 7 lives on the other side of the ledger. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet. Sit down, commanders, he said. You've made your point, and for what it's worth, you didn't need to. I stopped seeing this as insubordination about 10 minutes into the briefing. He tapped the table. There's a concept some of you know and some of you don't. It's the difference between the letter of an order and the intent behind it. Every order this military gives is given in service of a larger purpose. That sniper element was placed on that ridge for one reason and one reason only: to protect the ground force. That was the intent. That was always the intent. The specific rules of engagement were means to that end. He looked up. When her spotter died and her comms went out, Staff Sergeant Hart was faced with a situation where following the letter of her orders would have meant betraying their entire purpose. And she chose the purpose over the letter. That is not insubordination. That is what we are supposed to mean when we talk about a soldier who understands why she fights, and not just how. Carter felt something loosen in his chest that had been clenched since the Black Hawk landed. Now, the general said, and there was iron in it, now a decision being made in real time in front of all of them. Here is what is not going to happen. What is not going to happen is that this engagement gets buried because it's operationally sensitive, and the paperwork is easier if we don't talk about it. I have seen that done. I have watched extraordinary soldiers do extraordinary things and then watched it all vanish into a classified vault because it was convenient. Not this time. This time, we are going to do the harder thing, which is the right thing. He looked around the table. I want a full commendation package assembled. I want every element of this engagement documented and verified, the confirmed kills, the tactical impact, the lives saved. I want the Apache crew's account. I want the Black Hawk crew's account. I want the ground force commander's statement, and I want it done right. Because whatever we ultimately decide this soldier is owed, and I have my own strong opinion about that, it is going to be built on a complete and honest record. Are we clear? Clear, sir, came this answer around the table. One more thing. The general's voice dropped. Her spotter, Sergeant Cole. I understand he was killed early in the engagement and recovered. I want him recognized too. From what I'm reading, this soldier fought the entire battle with her partner dead beside her, and she never stopped. That man's death didn't break her. If anything, it steadied her. He deserves to be part of this story, not a footnote to it. Make sure he's honored. Carter thought about the picture in Danny Cole's helmet band, about the wife 11 months married, about the last words a dying man had spent not on himself but on saving strangers, and he had to look down at the table for a moment before he could trust his own face. Later that day, Carter went back to the aid station. Hart was sitting up now. Her arm bandaged some color back in her face, and she looked at him as he came in, and she read something in his expression before he said a word. Well, she said, they decide what I am hero or criminal. Carter almost laughed. Neither one the way they put it. They decided you're a soldier who understood why she was there. He pulled a chair over and sat. There was a general in that room. He shut down any talk of insubordination before I even finished making the case for you. Said you chose the purpose of your orders over the letter of them, and that's exactly what they want soldiers to do. They're building a full commendation package, and Hart, they're recognizing Danny too. The general said so himself. He said your spotter deserves to be part of this story, not a footnote. He wanted him honored. Hart was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick. Good, she said. That's good. That's the part that matters. She looked at Carter. You spoke for me. In there, didn't you? I said what was true, Carter said. You didn't have to. You could have stayed quiet, let the process run, protected yourself. Her eyes were steady on his. SEAL officer stands up in a room full of brass and puts himself on the line for an Army sergeant he met yesterday. Why? Carter thought about how to answer that, and then he decided the true thing was the only thing worth saying, same as it had been in the debrief. Because you did the same for me, he said. You stood up on a mountain alone and put yourself on the line for 6 men you'd never met with. No promise it would ever be recognized. No promise you'd even survive it. You did it because it was right. You didn't need a reason past that. He held her gaze. So when it was my turn, I didn't need a reason either. That's all. That's how it's supposed to work. You looked out for us. We look out for you. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. Evelyn Hart looked at him for a long moment, and then for the first time since he'd met her, since he'd hauled her bleeding into a Black Hawk, she smiled. It was small and tired, and it didn't last long. But it was real. You know, she said, when I was up on that ridge, and I saw that Apache start hammering only the east side over and over, leaving the northwest clean, I thought either somebody down there is smarter than they have any right to be, or I'm about to walk right into a gun because I misread a random pattern. The smile flickered again. Turned out somebody was smarter than they had any right to be. Whose idea was that, the corridor? Talking to me with the gunship. My radio man, Delgado. Carter shook his head. He said she's a sniper. She doesn't need words. She reads battlefields for a living. Bet the whole plan on you being smart enough to read it. And you were. He bet my life on me being able to read cannon fire, Hart said. He bet your life on you being exactly as good as you turned out to be, Carter said. And he was right. Hart absorbed that, and something moved behind her eyes, some understanding of what it had actually meant that a group of men in a helicopter had trusted her mind so completely that they'd staked her survival on it. I want to meet him, she said. Delgado and the Apache pilot and all of them. Every man who was on that mountain and in that sky today. I want to look them in the eye, her voice caught. I spent that whole morning shooting for people I couldn't see, couldn't talk to, didn't know if I was even helping. I want to see their faces. I want them to be real. They're real, Carter said gently. They're right outside. Kane, Torres, Delgado, they haven't left. They've been keeping watch out there since we landed. Waiting on you. He stood. You ready to meet the men you saved? Evelyn Hart wiped her eyes one more time and squared her shoulders, the way she'd squared them behind her rifle, and nodded. Yeah, she said. Bring 'em in. Let me see who Danny told me to save. And Carter went to the door and he called them in, and one by one the men filed into that aid station. These hard, quiet, extraordinary men who owed her everything, and they stood around the bed of the soldier who had been nothing but a distant miracle to them all morning, and now was finally fully real. And nobody quite knew what to say, because how do you thank someone for your own life and for the lives of the men beside you? And there aren't words built for that, there just aren't. So Kane, the big, calm point man, was the one who finally spoke. He stepped forward and he looked down at her, and his voice was rough. Ma'am, he said, I don't know how to say this, right? So I'm just going to say it plain. My name's Chief Petty Officer Kane. I've got a wife and 2 little girls back in Virginia, and they're going to get to see their daddy again because of what you did today. He swallowed hard. I don't know how to pay that back. I don't think there's a way. But I wanted you to know their names, Emma and Sophie. That's who you saved. Not just me, them. And one by one, the others did the same. Torres, who had a mother in San Antonio who'd already buried 1 son. Whitfield, who was going to be a father in 4 months and hadn't told anyone on the team yet, and told them all now in that room because he wanted her to know there was going to be a child in the world because of her. Delgado, who couldn't get through it, who just gripped her hand and shook his head and couldn't find the words. And young Reyes wheeled in from his own bed, the kid who'd been the first one shot, who looked at her with tears streaming down his face and said, "I'm 26 years old, ma'am. I got my whole life still, and I got it because of you. I don't even know what to do with that." Evelyn Hart listened to all of it, to every name, to every life, and she held it the way she'd held everything else that morning. And when they were done, she looked around at all of them, and she said the only thing that was true. "I lost my spotter up there," she said, her voice steady now, steadier than it had been all day. "I lost Danny. And I've been asking myself since the second I got on that bird whether it was worth it, whether anything could be worth losing him." She looked at each of them in turn, at the wives and the daughters and the mothers and the unborn child, at the whole weight of the lives standing in that room. "And now I know it was, because Danny's last words told me to save you. And I did, and you're going to go home. All of you. And that's what he wanted. That's the last thing he ever asked for in this world, and I gave it to him." Her voice finally broke, but she didn't stop. She pushed through it. "So thank you for being real, for being worth it, for giving me a reason that his death meant something." And in that small aid station on a forward base at the edge of a war, 7 soldiers who had met the day before as strangers, separated by 800 meters and 2,000 feet, and a wall of enemy fire, stood together in the quiet and understood that they were bound now, all of them, for the rest of their lives by a single morning on a mountain where one soldier had refused to let them die. The bond forged in that aid station did not fade the way battlefield bonds sometimes do, worn thin by distance and time, in the slow return to ordinary life. If anything, it deepened, because the story of what happened on that mountain refused to stay quiet, and the more it was told, the more it changed the people who heard it. But before any of that, before the commendations and the questions and the classified programs, there was a funeral. Sergeant Danny Cole was laid to rest 10 days later, and Evelyn Hart stood at the front of that gathering, still with her arm in a sling, and she watched them fold the flag, and she did not look away. Not once, not for a single second. She had promised herself she wouldn't. She had left him on a mountain because she'd had no choice, and she would not leave him again now. Not even with her eyes, not even for the small mercy of not having to watch. Danny's wife was there. Her name was Sarah, and she was younger than Hart had imagined. And when the ceremony ended, she came and found the sniper standing off to the side, and the 2 women looked at each other, and neither of them knew what to say. "You were with him," Sarah said finally, "at the end, weren't you?" "I was," Hart said. "I was right beside him." Sarah's chin trembled. "Was he afraid? I need to know. I can't stop thinking about it. Was he afraid at the end?" And Evelyn Hart, who had spent her whole career being economical with words, who had never once in her life said more than a situation required, understood that this was the most important thing she would ever be asked, and that she had to get it exactly right, because this woman was going to carry whatever Hart said for the rest of her life. "No," Hart said, and she meant it, and Sarah could hear that she meant it. "He wasn't afraid. I was holding his hand, and he wasn't thinking about himself at all." "Do you know what his last words were?" Sarah shook her head, unable to speak. "There were 6 men down in the valley about to die, and Danny knew I was the only one who could save them. And with the last breath he had, he didn't ask me to hold him or to tell you anything. Though God knows he loved you, everybody on that mountain knew he loved you. With his last breath, he told me to go save those men. He spent the last thing he had on other people's lives." Hart's own voice was steady, a gift she was giving this woman through sheer force of will. "Your husband died the way almost nobody gets to die, Sarah. He died certain of who he was. He died a hero, and he knew it, and his last act on this earth was to save 6 other men. Those men are alive right now. They went home to their own families. Because of him. Because of what he told me to do." Sarah was crying openly now, but there was something else in her face too. Something that Hart had hoped to put there, something like the first fragile edge of a piece she could build the rest of her life on. "He carried your picture," Hart said softly. "Every mission, he'd take it out and look at it before we set up. I saw him do it 100 times. You were the last thing he looked at before every dangerous thing he ever did. And the man he was, the man who could stay that calm and that selfless, with everything falling apart around him, that man was the man you made him. You should know that." Whoever he was up on that mountain, you had a hand in making him. Sarah reached out and took Hart's hand, the way Danny had taken it on the ridge, and she held on, and for a long moment the two women who had loved the same man in completely different ways stood together and grieved him and were grateful for him and let him go. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for being with him, for not letting him be alone." "He was never alone," Hart said. "Not for 1 second. I promise you that." The commendation came through 6 weeks later, and it was everything the general had promised and more. They did it right exactly as he'd ordered, the full package verified and documented and honest. 23 confirmed kills, more than 30 enemy fighters neutralized or disabled. 7 American lives saved 6 SEALs, and they added later when they traced it all the way through the crew of a helicopter that would have been destroyed on approach if the anti-air positions hadn't been cleared. An engagement that intelligence analysts would study for years, that would be taught quietly in schools, where they teach soldiers how to think when everything falls apart. And they honored Danny Cole too. His name was written into the record alongside hers, a spotter who had died early and whose death had not broken his sniper, but steadied her, whose last words had directed the entire course of the battle. He was not a footnote. The general had seen to that personally. Danny Cole was part of the story, woven all the way through it exactly as he deserved to be. But the medals and the citations, as much as they mattered, were not the thing that changed Evelyn Hart's life. The thing that changed her life happened quietly in a room she wasn't expecting, when a man she'd never met sat down across from her and slid a folder across the table that had no name on it. "Staff Sergeant Hart," he said, "I've read everything about what you did in that valley. Every page. Watched every second of the drone footage. Listened to every radio recording." He folded his hands. "In 22 years, I have never seen anything quite like it. Not the marksmanship, though the marksmanship is extraordinary. What I've never seen is the decision-making. You fought a 2-front engagement alone with no communications, and you never once made a wrong call. Every shot you took was the shot that mattered most in the exact order it needed to be taken. You cleared an extraction corridor from 800 meters with no way to coordinate with the ground force. And when a gunship crew tried to talk to you in cannon fire, you read the message on the second pass." He leaned forward. "That is not a skill I can train into someone. That is something a person either has or does not have. And you have it." "Who are you?" Hart asked. "That's a complicated question," he said. "Let me answer a different one. There is a program. It doesn't have a name, I can tell you. The people in it don't exist on paper. They go where conventional forces can't go, and they do things that conventional rules can't account for. And they do it in situations exactly like the one you handled on that mountain, and except worse and more often and entirely alone." He tapped the nameless folder. "The whole program is built on finding people who can think clearly when everything is chaos, who can make the right call with no one to tell them what the right call is, who understand the difference between the letter of an order and its purpose. People who will do the right thing when nobody's watching and nobody will ever know." He looked at her steadily. "That's a very short list of people, Staff Sergeant. After that valley, your name is at the top of it." Hart was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the mountain. She thought about Danny. She thought about the life she'd had before that morning, the rules she'd believed in, the doctrines she'd lived by, and how all of it had come down to a single choice on a single ridge, the choice to act when everyone else was waiting. "Why me?" she asked. "You've got the whole military to choose from. Snipers with more kills, more deployments, more experience. Why me?" "Because most of them, faced with what you faced, would have followed their orders," he said simply. "They'd have observed. They'd have reported. They'd have waited for permission that was never going to come, and 6 good men would have died, and every one of those snipers would have written a report explaining that they'd done everything by the book." He held her gaze. "You threw the book away the second it stopped serving its purpose. And then you were still disciplined enough, still precise enough to make it work. That combination, the willingness to break the rules and the skill to break them successfully, is the rarest thing in this entire profession. It's the whole reason the program exists, and it's why I'm sitting across from you." Hart looked down over the folder with no name on it, and she thought about what it meant. A life in the shadows. Missions too complex for conventional rules. The kind of work that would take her further from ordinary life than she'd ever been, into places where the choice she'd made on that mountain wouldn't be an exception, but the entire job. "I need to think about it," she said. Take all the time you need, he said and stood. But Staff Sergeant, for what it's worth, the world needs people who act when everyone else is waiting. There are a lot of soldiers who can follow orders. There are very few who know when not to. Whatever you decide, don't ever let anyone convince you that what you did on that mountain was anything other than exactly right. He left the folder on the table and walked out, and Evelyn Hart sat alone with it for a long time. She went to see Carter before she decided. She'd stayed in touch with all of them, the SEALs, in the way that soldiers who've been through something stay in touch, sporadic and deep months of silence, and then a call that picks up like no time had passed. But this was different. This she needed to talk about face to face. They met at a diner off base, the kind of place with bottomless coffee and vinyl booths, and Carter listened while she laid it out. The nameless man, the nameless folder, the offer. So they want you for the program, Carter said when she finished, the one that doesn't exist. You know about it. I know it exists. I know I don't have the whole picture, and I know the people who do don't talk about it. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. They approached you because of the valley. Yeah, Carter was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you something? Something I've been thinking about since that day. He looked up at her. When we were pinned in that compound and my men were G'ing and I couldn't reach our overwatch, I gave up on you. In my head, for about 30 seconds before your first shot, I'd written you off. I figured Hawkeye was gone, overs run, dead, whatever. I'd already moved on to trying to survive without you. He shook his head slowly, and then that machine gunner on the North Ridge just dropped, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. And Kane said somebody was shooting them from up high, and I realized you were still alive and still fighting when I'd already counted you out. He met her eyes. I've thought about that a lot, about how I gave up on you and you didn't give up on us, even alone, even with your spotter dead, even with no way to know if it was working. You didn't quit on men you'd never met. I couldn't, Hart said. That's the thing nobody understands. It wasn't brave exactly. It's that I literally couldn't do the other thing. I couldn't lie there and watch. My body wouldn't let me. Danny told me to save you, and something in me just couldn't do anything else. That's what they want, Carter said. That right there, that thing you just described, where you can't not act. You can't teach that. Either a person has it or they don't. And you have it. He set down his coffee. So here's my honest opinion, since you came all this way to ask for it. That program is exactly where you belong. Not because it's glamorous, it's not. It'll take everything from you and give you almost nothing back that anyone can ever see. But because there are people out there in the worst situations imaginable who are going to need somebody who acts when everyone else waits, and you're that person. You proved it on a mountain in the worst circumstances I've ever witnessed. If you say no, those people don't get you. And that's a real loss. That's lives that don't get saved. Hard absorb that. You're telling me to take it. I'm telling you that you already know what you're going to do, Carter said gently. You've known since the man left the folder on the table. You came here because you wanted someone to tell you it was okay. So I'm telling you, it's okay. It's more than okay. Go do the thing you were built to do. He paused. But Evelyn, do me one favor. What? Don't disappear. I know that's the nature of it. I know you'll be a ghost off the books, gone for months doing things you can never tell me about. But when you can, when there's a window you call, because those 6 men, my men and me, were not just people you saved. We're your family now. That happened on the mountain, whether either of us planned it or not. And family stays in touch, even the ones who become ghosts. You understand? Evelyn Hart looked at this SEAL commander who had stood up in a room full of generals to defend her, who had kept his promise to bring Danny home, who had become, over the span of one impossible morning and the weeks that followed, something like the brother she'd never had. I understand, she said. I'll call, I promise. Then you've got my blessing for whatever that's worth, Carter said. Go be the ghost. Go save the people nobody else can save. And know that no matter how far off the books you go, no matter how invisible you become, there are 7 people in this world who know exactly what you are and will never, ever forget it. She took the offer. Of course she took the offer. Carter had been right. She'd known before she ever walked into the diner. She signed the papers that made her officially someone who didn't exist, and she disappeared into the world the nameless man had described, into the missions too complex for conventional rules, into the places where the choice she'd made on the mountain was the whole job. And she was, by every account, that filtered back through the guarded channels of people who knew extraordinary at it. The instinct that had made her stand up on that ridge, the refusal to watch when she could act the precision married to the willingness to break rules that had outlived their purpose, all of it made her exactly what the program had hoped for. She saved people whose names would never be known in places that would never be reported, in situations that would have ended in tragedy, without one soldier who acted when everyone else was waiting. But she kept her promise to Carter. Every window, every chance she called. And once a year, when the calendar came around to the anniversary of the Valley, they all gathered, all 7 of them, the 6 SEALs and the sniper who'd saved them, wherever they could manage it, whoever could make it, and they raised a glass to Danny Cole and they told the story again, the way you tell the stories that made you who you are. The story spread beyond them too, in the quiet way true stories spread through the military. Young soldiers heard it, snipers in training heard it, and instructors used it carefully without names to teach something that was hard to teach any other way. The lesson that the rules exist to serve a purpose, and that the highest form of discipline is sometimes knowing when the purpose demands you break the rule. They taught the story of a sniper on a ridge who chose the intent of her mission over its letter and saved 7 lives and changed what an entire community of warriors believed was possible for one soldier to do. Years later, at one of those anniversary gatherings, Rhea is no longer the scared 26-year-old kid, but a seasoned operator now with deployments of his own, asked Hart a question he'd been carrying a long time. "Do you ever wonder," he said, "what would have happened if you'd followed your orders, if you'd just observed and reported like you were supposed to?" The table went quiet. It was the question underneath everything, the one they all thought about and never asked. Hart turned her glass slowly in her hand. "For a while I did," she said. "In the beginning, I'd lie awake and run it back. What if Danny hadn't told me to act? What if I'd stayed dark? What if the rules had won?" She looked up. "And then I stopped wondering. Because there's no version of that where I live with myself. There's no version where I lie on a mountain and watch 6 men die and then explain in a report that I did everything by the book. That soldier, the one who watches, I'm not her. I never was. Danny knew that. That's why his last words were what they were. He wasn't asking me to do something against my nature. He was reminding me of my nature at the exact moment I needed to hear it." She raised her glass slightly toward the empty place at the table they always left for Danny. "He didn't tell me to break the rules. He told me to be who I already was. And who I already was somebody who couldn't watch good men die when she had the power to stop it." She looked around the table at the 6 men whose lives she'd saved, at the families that existed because of that morning, at the children who'd been born, and the anniversaries that had been celebrated, and the ordinary human happiness that had all flowed downstream from one decision on one ridge. "You want to know the truth?" she said. "The truth is, I didn't change the outcome of a battle that day. I mean, I did, but that's not the real thing. The real thing is that I proved something. Not to command, not to the program, not to anybody with a rank. To myself, I proved that when it mattered most, when every rule and every excuse and every safe option told me to lie still and watch, I got up, I acted. I did the hard right thing instead of the easy wrong thing. And once you've proven that to yourself, once you know for a fact that you're the kind of person who acts when everyone else is waiting, everything after that is just a matter of doing it again." Kane, the big calm point man, who had 2 daughters named Emma and Sophie, who were teenagers now, who had gotten to raise them because of the woman across the table, lifted his glass. "To the angel on the mountain," he said quietly, the name they had given her that first day, the name that had stuck. "And to Danny Cole, who told her to fly." They drank to it, all of them. And in the quiet after, each of them thought their own private thoughts about that morning, about the 800 meters and the 2,000 feet, about the machine gunner who dropped, and the corridor written in cannon fire, and the last pistol round fired on a dead sprint, about a soldier who could not talk to them and could not hear them, and saved every one of them anyway on nothing but faith and skill and a refusal to quit. Because that was the thing in the end that the story came down to. Not the 23 kills, remarkable as they were. Not the tactics, brilliant as they were. Not the medals or the program or the missions that came after. The thing at the center of it, the thing that made young soldiers lean forward when they heard it and made hardened operators go quiet when they told it was simpler than any of that. And it was the thing Evelyn Hart had proven on a gray ridge in eastern Afghanistan on the worst morning of her life. That in modern war, with all its technology and firepower, an overwhelming force victory does not always belong to the largest army or the heaviest weapons. Sometimes it belongs to a single person alone and outnumbered and cut off from everyone who simply decides that she will not wait, that she will not watch, that she will act. Sometimes the entire outcome of a battle, the difference between a massacre and a rescue, between six folded flags and six men going home, comes down to one soldier who, when every rule and every excuse gives her permission to do nothing, chooses instead to do everything. Evelyn Hart was that soldier. On a mountain where 30 enemy fighters had pinned down the best of the best and left them dying, she stood up alone and refused to let it happen. She lost her spotter and kept fighting. She ran out of rifle ammunition and kept fighting. She was hunted and flanked and wounded and cornered, and she kept fighting until every man she'd been sent to protect was safely off that mountain and headed home. And when it was over, when the impossible had been made real by one person's refusal to accept the odds, she had taught everyone who witnessed it a truth that no manual could contain and no order could command. That courage is not the absence of fear or the following of rules. Courage is the decision made alone and in silence with no one watching, and no guarantee of reward to act when acting is right and waiting is wrong. On that ridge with one rifle and one sidearm, and a heart that would not let her stand down, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Hart proved it beyond any argument for the rest of her life and for every soldier who would ever hear her story. When lives are on the line and everyone else is waiting for permission, limits stop existing, and the one who acts changes everything. She was that one. She always would be, and nothing and no one would ever take that from her.